Hello and welcome to In My View, the show where we put our opinions up front as we enter the gladiatorial arena, but we leave it to you, the audience, to give the thumbs up or thumbs down. My name is Cory Bernardi, and tonight I'm joined by former Labor MP Emma Husar, who believes it's time to take a stand and stamp out racism in our sporting codes. We also welcome first-time panellist, commentator and activist Lauren Southern, who thinks defunding woke university subjects is the right move. But first, like a lot of normal people, I think the idea of drag queens with highly sexualised pseudonyms and personas reading stories to children is rather strange. The fact that they are also sanctioned by the state to teach children to ignore biological reality and rather choose their own gender adventure, I think is dangerous. Some would actually say it's child abuse. That's why drag queen storytime in Queensland has attracted a modicum of opposition and some polite protests. But the abuse from some in response to these protests led one young gay man who actually opposed drag queen storytime to tragically take his own life. And this week, I learned of even more pushback. One patriotic Australian and a friend of mine, Lyle Shelton, dared write about the history of storytime participants and detail why he didn't think they were appropriate role models. Now, I'll give you a hint. It might have something to do with one of them actually winning an award from the porno industry. Anyway, the precious petals have now dragged Lyle Shelton to the Human Rights Commission, where he's forced to turn up and respond to these allegations. If he doesn't, he could go to jail. Now imagine that. Maybe, just maybe, going to jail for saying that something rather creepy is, well, rather creepy. Is there no freedom of speech, thought or expression anymore? But if that's not bad enough, the drag queens have no legal expenses of their own. The state is picking up their legal tab, while the real victim here, Lyle Shelton, has to crowdfund for his legal defence. Now, this is just another recent example of where the process is part of the punishment when you dare to stand against the regressive radicals. And this abusive process has been embraced by those that are seeking to overturn normality and change society to fit their own image. I say enough is enough. Parliament needs to put a stop to this nonsense. Well, Emma, there are a lot of issues I've raised there about whether it's appropriate for sexualised personas to be talking to children, but also about how we deal with complaints and that you're a victim if someone makes a complaint against you because you're the one with no power. What's your take on my take on drag queen storytime?
My take on your hot take, Cory, is obviously, you sort of lost me in the beginning at normal people because I consider myself normal people. And my kids, and I have three, so I think that I get this right, would much rather be read to by RuPaul or Dame Edna Everage than they would be by me. Now, we're living in a time where some of our literacy rates are some of the lowest that they've ever been. And I am a massive fan, with a background, you know, coming out of primary education, of anybody reading to any child anywhere. And I don't think your point about, you know, linking the porno industry and someone receiving an award as being inappropriate to read to a child. We have a register for those kinds of people that might be inappropriate to read to kids, but I think simply because someone wants to put on some guyliner and some makeup and dress up in a way that doesn't maybe, you know, match something that you might do, Cory, doesn't make them inappropriate story readers to our children. You raise another interesting point, and oh, I got you now. It's my turn to jump in. You raised the point about freedom of expression, and I think what we have is people who want to dress up as drag queens. They're obviously expressing themselves, and they have every right to do that. It's not freedom of convenience. It's not freedom of you know, say whatever you like. It's actually not freedom of responsibility. So I think you can't pick and choose your own adventure in terms of who's expressing themselves.
Actually, but we're not talking about Barry Humphries. We're talking about highly sexualised personas who have vile names which represent or reflect actual sexual practices that are advocates for gender bender theory. Now, I just think that's inappropriate. If you want to have these sorts of conversations with children, then you can have these conversations if that's what you think is necessary, but you don't need these sorts of personas to do it. Lauren, is this what happens in Canada? Do you see the gender bender fairies pushing the child story time? Is that what happens in Canada?
We do have Drag Queen Story Hour in Canada as well, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately, not because I am against people reading to children. I actually agree with Emma on that point. We do need more of this. However, the idea that there should be no gatekeeping there and anyone should be reading to children just because reading is inherently good is really opening the floodgates for some bizarre stuff. There's a reason we don't have Commando Story Hour or Stripper Story Hour or Bartender Story Hour. We necessarily age gate things because we understand that children are not quite mentally developed to process certain ideas. The reason we don't expose children to sexual content is the same reason we don't give 5-year-olds driver's lessons. And there's something very predatory to me about including transgender ideology in an elementary school, and it has nothing to do with homophobia or being against the LGBTQ community. I would feel the same way about an army or military recruiter going to an elementary school. You're asking people to sign on to an ideology, onto something that can impact their lives, who they choose to be when they grow up, whether it be male or female, whether they choose to take hormones, if they're going to take part in the sexualized culture, or if they're going to join a war. Both of these things, you can still love the military and say, don't think it's for children. You can still love the gay community and say, don't think these decisions are for children yet. We as a society age gate to protect kids, not because we hate certain things within the adult world.
Well, may I open up the other aspect of what I raised, where because people have hurt feelings or they feel that someone said something that is unfair to them, they can report, in this case, a critic to the Human Rights Tribunal, where they have to wear all the expenses, all the costs of defending themselves against what seemed like a stacked system. Emma, do you feel that there needs to be some reform in how we deal with personal complaints and people who feel aggrieved?
You're talking to someone who sued a media outlet for defamation, Cory, and let me tell you, those legal expenses were not exactly the cheapest bill that I have ever paid. So of course, our legal system has got some significant issues, but in terms of our Human Rights Commission and our Disability Commission and places that are established to enable those people who are aggrieved. So in this case, it's the drag queens who have taken Lyle Shelton, who isn't unfamiliar or in unfamiliar territory about shooting his mouth off, potentially inappropriately.
No,
in
about
this
having
case.
an opinion, a valid opinion. He's having a valid opinion, Emma, not shooting his mouth off.
You can have a valid opinion, but you can still do so in a way that's offensive to other people. And just because someone has an opinion, it doesn't give them freedom of consequence of having such an opinion. Everybody has an opinion, and how you choose to share that opinion is obviously, governed by yourself, and it's a self-regulatory practice of knowing the difference between something that's offensive and is going to offend a segment or a group, in this case a minority of our society. If we want to all live harmoniously and we all want a freedom of expression, we've all got a freedom to be responsible, and that's where Lyle's come unstuck.
Well, I think Emma, you make a very good point that you are free to have an opinion, and nothing that Lyle Shelton wrote would be, I think, in any reasonable reading of it, reasons for him to be taken to the Human Rights Tribunal, and yet he has to be victimised by this. Now, Lauren, once again, is this your experience internationally? Is this an international trend where the process is part of the punishment for people who dare speak against the zeitgeist?
I really need to warn you about this Human Rights Commission tribunal thing, because we have this in Canada, and actually in my hometown, Vancouver, we had a case where a transgender individual was going from a hair waxing place to hair waxing salon, asking people to give them a Brazilian wax, despite the fact that many of these were migrant, even Muslim women that would not be allowed to wax a male individual who was identifying as female. And this individual took all of these salons to the Human Rights Commission and put some of these women and these businesses out of business because they were seen to be bigoted and offensive for not wanting to wax male genitalia. Some of them not having been trained in the act of waxing male genitalia before in their entire life. So this is something that has set a dangerous precedent in Canada. It is something that has been harmful to our society, taking the idea of what is offensive to people too far. And I worry that this is going to possibly set a precedent in Australia as well that could lead to such ridiculous cases as we have in Canada at this very moment.
Well, unfortunately, Lauren, it's not a precedent. This is, I think, just another example of where it's taken place. But, you know, Emma, it's going to raise a point now where it's not the first time either, Emma, is it, that we've experienced some racism in sport?